Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss and internet shitlords. And as you can see today, I'm cannibalizing the space there, or colonizing. Let's say I'm colonizing the space of the fifth edition book. But I wanted it there because I'm talking again about the Radiant Citadel. So I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to try to get through this quickly. But it just keeps getting weirder and funnier and grosser, frankly. Today, I'm going to talk about things that they don't want regular gamers to know about the Radiant Citadel. And there's basically four things that I have found so far that have been communicated to me. There we go. Communicated to me by people, and I thank everybody who's been sending me stuff. If you know things that you think would be important to tell the world about the Radiant Citadel, because you I don't know if you've bought the book. I hope you haven't bought the book, but if you've seen pages of it or something like that. But make sure it's a credible statement. I need to see some kind of direct evidence of what you're talking about, because I don't want to get anything inaccurate. I've been accused of inaccuracy before, and part of why I was accused of inaccuracy was because I relied on what Wizards was saying in their statements and what was showing up on the gamer media that was obviously being fed to them by Wizards. And then it turned out that what was actually in the book was different. And what we have here is kind of a reverse version of that. And this is number one. The first thing that they do not want regular gamers to know is that Radiant Citadel was a special make work project that hired only non-white people. I can't say game designers because several of them had no experience in game design, right? But it was a segregationist policy of hiring only certain races of people, and they do not want regular gamers to know about that. And you're saying, well, hang on, but that's what they've been talking about the whole time. I'm a regular gamer, I know about it. Well, no, you're not quite a regular gamer if you're watching this. And there's one important difference, which is if you're watching this, unless you just completely stumbled on it, and this is the first thing you've ever seen online about RPGs, you are unusual in that the vast majority of people who play D&D do not actually spend time talking about it and being in discussion groups or having social media accounts linked to their social media that talk about RPGs. The vast majority of gamers don't do that. Right? So they have no idea. We're having these huge wars in the background. In the shadows, we're fighting these culture wars. And the person that's going to Barnes & Noble and buying the player's handbook has no idea that's what's going on. And so they don't know what's happening. They don't know the agenda. They don't know any of that. And in this case, Wizards doesn't want them to know. And you're saying, well, how is that possible? Right? Well, again, they have, for the last several months, since the beginning of the year, basically, been talking about Radiant Citadel, and everywhere, they're saying this has been created exclusively by a group of writers who are all people of color. And there's like 50 people involved in the project, and they're all people of color, no white people. Right? And they've been like shouting this to the rooftops on their media, and especially on gaming news media, which almost nobody except ultra liberals watch, right? It's the wokest crowd. They're talking to the wokest crowd. So to them, they're desperately pushing this. They're saying it as an enormous virtue signal to gain points for the fact that they are helping with the work of deconstructionism, of deconstructing Western civilization, right? And in turn, when it comes to the actual book, though, and this is what I've been told, I believe at this point it's a fairly reliable source, and I had two people tell me this. There is nowhere in the Radiant Citadel book that says that this book was created only by people of color. There's nowhere that it says that the settings are all based only on non-Western settings. That doesn't show up at all. There's no commentary on that. They don't want regular gamers to know that, because they know that regular gamers who saw that would say, well, fuck, I don't want to be lectured to, right? It's the same reason that they try to hide the social justice messages in TV shows and movies, right? Like they'll tell you, oh, this is an exciting new TV show about Boba Fett, right? Or this is a movie about Thor or whatever, those are just two examples, right? And you're thinking, oh yeah, cool, I like Boba Fett, I like Thor, right? And then you go and you pay money to see it, or you subscribe to a service and you pay money to see it. And then suddenly it turns out it's not really about those characters. Thor or Boba Fett end up being incompetent buffoons and idiots. And by the way, I haven't watched the new Thor movie. This isn't actually a review on the new Thor movie. It's definitely a review on Boba Fett, though. And these women and people of color around them are super hyper competent and prove how much better they are and how much more awesome they are than the character that you actually love, right? And so the whole thing is actually a massacre of the character you love, a character assassination of that character. While wearing a skin suit telling you, yeah, this is the thing you love, right? It's a trap, right? That's what it is. It's a trap. And that's what they're doing here, right? They know that if gamers knew that this was about virtue signaling and about leftist ideology being manipulated into a setting, that the whole point of it is for the purpose of indoctrination, right? And for the purpose of making a political statement, by Wizards of the Coast, they wouldn't buy it, right? So they are counting on making it seem like, yeah, this is just a really cool, like, planar setting. And look at this, a big crystal, and you can travel to like 27 different universes and whatever, whatever they're saying there, right? And that's all, just covered. So that's the biggest one. I started with number one. The biggest thing they don't want them to know, they do not want regular gamers to know that this was a make work project with racial quotas, right? Second thing they don't want you to know about it, right, is the regular gamers to know about it, is that in the setting, there's a very strong defund the police message, okay? Obviously, this being a highly leftist work, almost all authority is seen as evil, right? It's seen as bad. But in particular, in the Radiant Citadel itself, we're told there are no police, right? You have these shield bearers who are the ones that go out and help people, but even they are like under severe restrictions to the point that it's better that they die than that they engage in aggressive combat against somebody else, right? And that's the rule. And so, and hilariously, the suggestion in the book apparently is that the player characters might want to be shield bearers, that might be what they want to do, right? Like, imagine that the DM trying to force his players to do that, the normal DM trying to force his normal players to do that, Like you'd be like, yeah, well, so from now on, you guys can't actually start any fight, and you can only fight long enough to protect yourselves, and you have to focus on, non-violent solutions, right? Like, can you imagine what a normal gaming group would say to that bullshit? But it goes more than that. Inside the city of the Radiant Citadel itself, apparently we're told that what we have is like community arbitration and restorative justice, right? It's basically a defund the police message. And of course, we're told that there's almost no crime. Why? Because there's no police, right? So it's a wonderful utopian paradise because we don't have a police force that is keeping the peace and maintaining, maintaining order, right? And then they add, because I guess they realize that this seems pretty unrealistic, right? Like, how the hell do you stop someone from committing crimes in that situation when they just don't want to stop, right? They said, oh, well, and you know what? There's magic that we use that will basically magically lock the brain of a person so they can't commit crime anymore. Right. So okay, that is the most totalitarian thing imaginable, right? Like, once again, just like Blue Rose and any other time they've tried to make these leftist utopian settings, you just barely scratch the surface and you look and say, well, okay, so we have the only way to treat this document is as though this was a document of propaganda for the outside world, and the actual real Radiant Citadel is a horrific dystopia, right? Like, just horrific, right? So if you don't obey, their wizards are going to just destroy your brain, right? That's their solution, rather than having police, because police are racist. So come on. So we just have to make sure that the people we don't like, we'll just destroy their brains, and then there'll be utopia. That's how it always works. If we destroy enough people's brains, there'll be utopia. That's number two that they don't want to tell you. Number three, speaking of it's a socialist utopia. right? In the setting material, it says that they don't really worry about money. Money is not really something that's important in the Radiant Citadel, and people are just all taken care of, by the community. The community makes sure everybody has the same, food and care and lodging, right? So everybody is provided for by this socialist system. And how do they do that? Well, actually, it turns out that they do that because they have really high taxation. They say so in the book itself. And when you get to there, they're going to start charging your adventurers really high taxes, right? They have to give some. And the more successful they are, the higher level adventurers they are, the more that they have to pay. Right now, they kind of fudge it. They actually say, well, it could be that they could give service or they could give something else. Well, that's not usually how it works in a socialist government. In a socialist government, you have to give away everything, and then they'll decide what you get back, right? That's how it would normally be. And that's how it seems to be for everybody else in the setting except the adventurers. So they're making like a special exception, I guess, because the special adventurers are meant to be leftist heroes. And of course, that is technically accurate, because in any socialist country, the quote unquote leftist heroes don't actually have to live like everyone else. They don't live in near poverty. They get to still fly in jets and, have race cars and parties and eat 3 meals a day instead of one. And they still get to have really, really good lifestyle, sometimes much better than they ever could have possibly had because of how incompetent they would have been at anything else. If there hadn't been socialism, if they hadn't forced socialism on people, right? So technically, if you imagine that your player characters are part of the Revolutionary Guard, then it wouldn't be totally inaccurate. I'll grant you, right? But they say, well, that you still have to give away stuff when you get there, right? They're just really vague about how much they should give away, right? But for the rest of the population of the Radiant Citadel, there are apparently enormous taxes. They say this in more than one place in the book, and huge tariffs. And yet somehow the Radiant Citadel, where money isn't really important, so people presumably don't engage in a lot of monetary trade, and there are huge personal taxes, and there's gigantic tariffs for anyone bringing large amounts of stuff in. Somehow it's still a merchant hub, right? In spite of all of that, it's still a place that is a huge merchant center, right? And you can say, oh, well, it's because it's at the key crossroads of all these dimensions. Well, if that was the case, then you'd have to, if they're charging so much in tariffs that it wouldn't make it worthwhile to bring the commerce, they're not going to bring the commerce. That's just the end of it, right? That's how it is. And this is, again, what socialists never understand. They're like, well, we should just do a 1,000% tax on any goods that get produced, right? Well, okay, then those goods are not going to be produced anymore, right? Oh, no, we have to force people to produce that. We'll have price fixing and we'll have high taxes and we'll force people to work. Yeah, that's how it works. Yeah, and that's how you end up with communist shitholes, right? That's how it is. So they really do not, the people who wrote this, another secret they do not want you to know is that the people who wrote this setting don't understand any of the basics of economics. Right? Because this place has got it's got many huge markets, including a gigantic wholesale market or something like that. And yet it's a completely socialist state where money doesn't matter to anyone. Everybody gets provided everything for free anyways. And, there's the commerce is heavily, heavily taxed. That makes no sense at all, right? Even if you said, well, it's a planar hub, right? Well, people would either go through it and go do trade somewhere else, or if the planar hub did not allow that, they just not trade, because you can't do a trade for something that's going to cost you more than it's worth, right? For something that you're going to, the cost that you're going to have to pay to get it sold means that you make negative profits, right? You end up losing money of the deal. So other than absolutely essential things, the only way that they could have trade would be on things that were that people had to come to acquire that were necessary for the survival of the setting, which means the two possibilities are this setting makes no sense, or every plane that it's connected to and trades with the Radiant Citadel is in fact a shithole country, which is interesting when you think about it, right? So apparently, this is like the collection of shithole third world countries that have their own planar hub. It's like the third world hub. It's like Sigil from Planescape, except for all the shitty places, I guess. And finally, the last of the secrets that they don't want you to know about it is that apparently on the Radiant Citadel, they govern by consensus. Yeah. So famously in Planescape, Sigil was theoretically controlled by the Lady of Pain, but she had very little active part. And the place was an extremely anarchic sort of place, right? It was like, it was the total Gen X setting, right? It was like this place, and I never liked Planescape very much. I thought it was a bit too edgy and hip, or whatever. But I will recognize it was very, very Gen X, right? It was like about you being independent, everybody making their own way, right? It was punk in a very meaningful sort of sense, and you're in a place where anything fucking goes, right? And just don't mess with me, right? And that was cool, right? But this is absolutely a leftist millennial setting, right? It's a socialist shithole. It's a tyranny. They'll lobotomize you if you disobey, and the government system is unbelievably unworkable and corrupt, right? So what it's based on, it's not a representative democracy. Instead, it's that each community selects one person who will then have absolute power to speak for that community on some kind of a council. And the way that council works is that they all have to reach consensus. In fact, we are told in the setting that the way that this is maintained is that any single counselor obtains by becoming counselor. They don't really seem, I don't know if they explain why. I wasn't, like, the part that I saw didn't explain why. But every single counselor has the power to shut down all the gates, all the access to all the other worlds, which means that all commerce will shut down, that all goods will stop arriving, that eventually all production is going to cease, and everybody there is going to starve to death, right? So that's like their veto, right? An absolute veto that they can say, if I disagree, I'm shutting everything down. And any one of them can do this. I don't know how many there are. I guess like 27. There's one for each of these realms that connect to the Radiant Citadel, right? So their logic in this is to say, well, that means that because any one of them can threaten to shut everything down, then everybody's going to have to reach an agreement, right? Everybody's going to have to compromise. But that's not how consensus works. We know that's not how consensus works. Look at, Tim Pool was one of the guys that talked a lot about this, but he wasn't the only one. People that were involved in Occupy Wall Street, and I knew this from before then because I was involved in organizations that had attempted consensus-based governance before, and it's always like this, right? But Tim Pool tells this story. I think it was him that was telling this story about Occupy Wall Street, where you'd have this consensus situation where everybody would talk, right, and talk and talk and talk. But eventually, what it meant was anytime you had to have consensus to make a decision rather than a simple majority vote, it meant that whoever was the most demanding would end up winning, as long as they refused to budge. Right? So whoever was the most extreme would end up being the winner in consensus. That's how it always works out, right? The loudmouth, and the communists figured this out long, long ago, right? It's why usually communist parties tend to move towards the most radical wing, because they bring people in. Those people are willing to sit there for 6 hours. They don't have jobs, right? They're willing to sit there for 6 hours and keep arguing until everyone else either leaves or is exhausted, and then they get consensus, and then they get their way. Right. So once again, this is the Radiant Citadel would be a socialist nightmare. That's what you're looking at there, right? There would be one where whoever was the most extreme, willing to see people die in this case to get their way, would inevitably win. So that's what you get with the Radiant Citadel as a setting, right? Not just that, but keep in mind that, again, a large number of the people who designed these adventures have little or no gaming experience, and some of them have probably never played D&D until very, very recently, if at all, if even still. There might be some that have written for this that still say, no, fuck, I'd never played D&D. Why would I do that, right? That's a stupid game for nerds. I did this for social justice, not for D&D. That's what they're saying, right? So you have a very clear choice before you, gamer man, right? On the one hand, you have, Player's Handbook here standing in for it, the Radiant Citadel, where you get people say, well, I wrote this adventure for the Radiant Citadel, and I wrote it based on the home culture of my abuelita. I've never been there, but it's part of me because of my skin color and my blood. And so that means I know everything about it. And, I even know some of the words like abuelita and also arepa. There will be arepas in there. That's one option. Or option two, something like Sword and Caravan, which is, this is the product of years of meticulous research in history. And it's based on actual history, mythology, and legends of a vast region, the Silk Road, with details and monsters and magic, all coming from their actual stories and myths and events from their actual history and their culture based on very careful study. You can choose study or magic blood. That's your option, right? That's what you can do. Unless, of course, you're like, well, I don't like either of those. And then if what you like is something weird and goofy, you're like, yeah, Radiant Citadel, yeah, it's all oppressive, but it's got like weird things, and that's fun. Well, try some fucking gonzo, dude. World of the Last Sun. A place that's got all kinds of crazy stuff: flying ships, wizards with rifles, robots, weird mutants, talking animals. Everything you want is in World of the Last Sun. If you're looking for a weird and exotic setting, it's set inside a Dyson sphere, for fuck's sake. So you do not need D&D. That's what I'm saying. You don't really need to buy Sword and Caravan or World of the Last Sun if you don't want to. I certainly hope you do. But what I'm saying is, you don't need D&D. You don't need Wizards products. And as long as they keep engaging in this kind of political activism over producing actual gaming content, you shouldn't abide by them. You shouldn't be there with them. You should look into the OSR. If not my books, other people's OSR books. But check it all out. Oh, and you're like, well, yeah, but they have like all these adventures, and there's like a dozen adventures. Well, there's 26 adventures in the Old School Companion too. Check them out. They run all ranges of level. So just like in those books, like there are low level, mid level, and high level adventures in the Old School Companion too. And they're way more interesting. They're not like any adventure you've ever seen before, and they're not based on a vegan cookbook author who's never actually gamed, making an adventure centered around vague memories of arepas. Okay, if you're asking what is an arepa, it's a Venezuelan food, which is sort of like it's a bad substitute for an empanada. Let's put it that way. Empanadas, tacos, burritos, tamales. To say nothing of things like shawarmas. All of those are nicer than arepas. I'm sorry, I love the Venezuelan people, but you have two things that I don't like about Venezuela. One of them is socialism, and the other one is arepas. But Venezuelans love them for some reason. All right, so I guess that's everything for today. Be sure to like this video, share it anywhere you think people need to hear this message, anywhere you think a normal gamer might see this and be warned and therefore not buy this book. Or share it anywhere you think it'll piss people off, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet, and check out my products, Sword and Caravan, World of the Last Sun, Old School Companion 2. Check out the RPG Pundit Presents series, 107 different PDFs, each of which is going to have something in there that you can use in your OSR or D&D game that you're going to actually find useful, that you're going to actually be able to play with, because it's made for gaming. It's not made for virtue signaling. It's not meant for narrative showing off. It's not made for social justice. It's made for gaming, and that's what you want, products that are made for gaming. Check out Star Adventure for science fiction, The Invisible College for modern occult conspiracy role-playing. There's all kinds of stuff. Check it out. Currently smoking Peterson oversized poker plus Argento Natural.